Welcome to Elected. I'm your host, Luke Radel. The election is just a few short weeks away, and here in NY-22, we're seeing lots of campaign commercials like this one.
It seems things are worse than ever. Grocery bills getting higher every week. Cashless Bell making us and our families less safe. It doesn't feel like our country anymore. Something has to be done.
Francis Conole doesn't cut it. He's a Joe Biden yes man. We need stronger fighters to reduce inflation and bring safety back to our streets.
Babe, I am so glad you're running for Congress.
I'm Brandon Williams, and I approve this message.
Whoa! It was his wife the whole time? What an M. Night Shyamalan twist, Brandon. I don't want to get too distracted by the ending, though, because in the middle of the ad, we see this shot of who we now know is Brandon's wife at the gas pump, and I registered that in my head as an attack on high gas prices. But actually, if you look at the text on screen and listen to the voiceover, it's about cashless bail making our families less safe. And they use a shot of Brandon's wife looking concerned over at the person across from her, who is this cool-looking guy who's filling up his Subaru, which apparently is a threat to our families here in Central New York. But the main point of that ad is to introduce us to Brandon's opponent, Francis Conole. Let's learn a little bit more about him in his own commercial.
I'm Francis Conole. My great-grandfather worked in this factory. And my dad worked here at Carrier until he lost his job, like so many, when they downsized. I got a job cleaning our schools to help out. And I was proud to serve our country. I'm Francis Conole, and I approve this message because we have to end tax breaks for outsourcing corporations. And instead, invest in advanced manufacturing and clean energy jobs right here at home.
Ooh, sorry guys, I'm a little seasick from watching that ad. Let me give you my thoughts in a way that I think Francis Conole would better respond to. I'm Luke Radel, and I watched Francis Conole's new campaign ad. And to be honest, I found it very disorienting. I really didn't like how every 5 or 6 words, he would move the camera around. But look guys, that's not the main ad that I'm here to talk about today. I want to talk about Francis Conole's most recent ad, which is an attack on Brandon Williams.
I gotta tell you, Brandon Williams is too extreme.
I'm pro-life without any qualification.
He's a radical Republican who would let politicians outlaw abortion, even for victims of rape. He even suggested there are instances when a woman's life should be sacrificed. Local Republicans opposed Williams because Williams supported the January 6th riot that led to the death of 5 police officers. I'm for Francis Conole because he'll put politics aside and do what's right for Central New York.
I'm Francis Conole, and I approve this message.
All right, there's a lot to unpack from that ad. First and foremost, my disappointment that this woman didn't turn out to be Francis Conole's wife the whole time, but we'll move on past that. It talks about Brandon Williams' quote, extremism on 2 issues, abortion and January 6th. On abortion, the Conole campaign once again claims that Brandon Williams supports restrictions on abortion, including in cases of rape and incest. Now, Williams has said repeatedly that he does not support such restrictions, including in this Q&A with Syracuse.com.
I said I do support the right for abortion in the case of incest, rape, and life of the mother.
You also see in that interview he mentioned an exception for the life of the mother, which is another quote mentioned in the ad from the New York Times, saying that Brandon suggested that a woman's life should be sacrificed in some cases. Now, I went to the New York Times article that this ad is quoting to see if I could find any sourcing for that information, and couldn't find any. I reached out to the Brandon Williams campaign, and they said that it's not true and that they weren't reached out to before the article was released. I then reached out to the Conole campaign to see if they had any evidence for this suggestion that was made supposedly by Brandon Williams, and they have not gotten back to me yet, but I will let you know if they do. So for right now, it seems like we're 0-2 on the Francis Conole ad abortion claims, but let's look at this last piece of audio here. Like we looked at with the Claudia Tenney impeachment attack ads against Anthony Brindisi, it's often interesting to see what is written on the screen versus what's being said out loud. And in this case, we see here the quote, "I'm pro-life," end quote, and then a separate quote underneath without any qualifications. But then when you listen to the ad, it all sounds like one continuous sentence.
I gotta tell you, Brandon Williams is too extreme.
I'm pro-life without any qualification.
Yeah, and that piece of audio is actually not what Brandon Williams said. It's 2 pieces of audio edited together, as the quotation marks would suggest. Here is the clip from a June interview in its full context.
But I think what's important is in a federal system, We're about to test this, with abortion. I'm pro-life by faith. Pro-life. I'm the pro-life candidate. I say that without any qualification. But it is, we're about, if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, which I expect, we're going to be in 50 states that are experimenting on where those boundaries are and what people really want. Nothing's going to change in New York, unfortunately, but we're going to see that play out. And I think the same is true with legalization of marijuana.
Now, that audio is from a June interview when Williams was running in the Republican primary against Steve Wells, who was largely considered to be the favorite, a moderate candidate who was viewed by some as a bit more wishy-washy on the issue of abortion. So the argument could be made here that Brandon's use of the words "without any qualification" was meant to be in comparison to Steve Wells, but it's still unclear what exactly he meant by that. So I wouldn't exactly call this claim by the Conole campaign misleading, though I would still say that Brandon Williams has made clear that he does not support restrictions on abortion in the case of rape, incest, or the life of the mother, and has also said he would not support any national abortion ban legislation. But next up on the issue of January 6th, the ad quotes a letter to the editor written by Joe Bick, the chair of the Clay Republicans Committee.
Local Republicans opposed Williams because Williams supported the January 6th riot that led to the death of 5 police officers.
I actually got a chance to speak to Joe Bick today about whether his views have changed on the issue of Brandon Williams and January 6th. Here's what he had to say.
I haven't seen the ad. I think it's important to know, we've gotten a lot more information about Brandon since we originally met with him in February. And actually our committee, myself included, supports his candidacy over Francis Conole really at every turn.
Yeah, I was curious, at the time you wrote the letter in August, I was wondering what gave you the impression that he supported the January 6th insurrection.
I think that when he met with us, it was our first meeting, and then a number of us were left with the impression that was the case. I have since been assured that is not the case. The letter was written because Brandon had run in a primary with another candidate, Steve Wells, and I was supporting Steve Wells, as well as it was in response to a letter that was not factually accurate.
Yeah, what was the basis, though, for that impression that you had that he supported the January 6th insurrection?
Because you didn't get a straight answer about it.
Yeah.
About what happened at January 6th, and you didn't get a straight answer about how he felt about the election results for the 2020 election. Like I said, he's since clarified that, and we are much more comfortable with him as a candidate.
So you don't believe...
That letter has been overcome by events.
Yeah, you don't believe he supports the January 6th insurrection?
No, I don't believe he does.
So now, according to Joe Bick, he's been assured that Brandon Williams does not support the January 6th insurrection. But let's see how Brandon Williams responded to a question on January 6th when asked in a public forum by Syracuse.com.
Well, let's move on to a question then about the January 6th attack. I haven't, and maybe you have, but I haven't heard you talk about that. I'm curious if you believe that former President Trump incited what took place that day, or if he bears any responsibility at all for what took place that day.
Kevin, you're exactly right. I've not really commented on it, and I would like to do so here, kind of like remembering January 6th, 2021, and really talk about where I was and what I was doing. So on January 6th, 2021, I was filling my car at a Byrne Dairy. Gas was $2.50 a gallon. And then I went into the Byrne Dairy and I bought a gallon of milk for $2 a gallon. And I think most Central New Yorkers, when they think back to January 6th, 2021, they're asking, what happened? Why is everything twice as expensive today as it was 2 years ago?
Yeah, guys, how can I worry about mob rioters storming the Capitol to overturn our democracy when this milk is so expensive?
Well, we did just talk about inflation, but I just want to ask one more time, and then if you're not going to answer the question, we'll move on. But do you believe that former President Trump incited the attack on the Capitol on January 6th? Do you believe he bears any responsibility at all for what took place that day?
Hey, I'll be honest, I really have not focused any attention on it. I didn't pay attention to it at the time.
You didn't pay attention to the January 6th attack when it took place?
I really didn't. I was heads down, in the middle of COVID, working on a business. So, if it's only relevant to people that are really still trying to fight that battle.
Sure, some people may say that this quote from Brandon Williams is a little bit insensitive to the police officers who were beaten and brutalized during the January 6th attack on Congress, but it doesn't prove that he ultimately supports the January 6th insurrection, just that he might be the only person in the country who doesn't have an opinion about it. All in all, this latest Francis Conole attack ad is deeply misleading, from its outright lies about Brandon Williams' position on abortion, to deceptively editing audio clips of him talking about the subject, to quoting scantily sourced news articles as though they're fact. And with so few days left to go until the election, it's important that we ask both of these candidates tough questions about the issues that matter most, because sometimes their answers will be as surprising as finding out that it was Brandon's wife the whole time. Thanks for watching Elected.